I'm like 5 at this point. I remember thinking I wish I was dead. I wanted to die. I kept screaming out that nobody loved me, nobody wanted me, no one even loves me enough to cry for me. All of a sudden, in front of me was this Jesus figure, and I didn't know he was Jesus. We sat at the foot of the bed and we looked at that little girl and we cried. We just cried for her. I knew at that moment someone loved me enough to cry for me. It was as if he didn't just come, he came with a gift for me. And then I had started experiencing things that were unexplainable.
These videos answer a lot of questions about why we're here, but I'm guessing you still have a few of your own. So join me for Wake Up Wednesdays at 5 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Mountain, 7 p.m. Central, and 8 p.m. Eastern, where I'll answer your questions live. And I might even have a few surprise guests show up. Together, we're waking up the collective. Thank you for watching. My guest today is Samantha Sides, who is for the very first time sharing her near-death experience with the world. And Samantha had experiences and encounters with Jesus when she was very young that has absolutely paved the way in her life for her to be here having this conversation and sharing her beautiful experience with everybody today. So Samantha, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Lori. I'm excited.
This is great. Well, I feel very honored to be able to have an experience come to our channel that has never been shared before. And I just want you to know that the people on this channel are such a beautiful community. You will be received with love in this experience in the comments. So
Thank you.
always want to make people feel comfortable. But
Okay.
let's go ahead and start when this first happened to you when you were a little girl in your bedroom.
It's funny. I think of my spiritual journey as I was not brought into a religious household. We were actually opposite of religion of any kind. I think like most people, my background was heartbroken, and it came from a lot of pain in childhood. We came from a lot of abuse physically and molestations and things of that nature. And my first experience with Christ was, well, I didn't know who he was. I had no clue who showed up. But I remember what had happened, and we had lived in a small, run down little home and in Texas, because I'm Texan. And anyway, we had lived in this ran down home, and when it would rain, it would pour through some of the leaks, especially in this one room. And I remember something had happened, and until this day, well, after this day, there was something I knew I would never do. And my whole thing in life is never forget. I was never going to forget, because this particular day, I can't remember what happened. I can't remember what brought me to my knees. And I'm like 5 at this point, but I remember thinking uh, that whatever had happened, and like I said, I wish I can unlock that. But what had ever happened, I I remember thinking I wish I was dead. I wanted to die, and I didn't think of any reason to live at that point. And I kept screaming out that nobody loved me, nobody wanted me. Why was I born? Why would he put me here? I didn't know who I was screaming at. I didn't know who was going to answer. I just knew that there was no reason to be in this life, in this world. If this is what I was brought into, then what kind of cruel joke was it? Why bring me here? To what? To be abused, to be hurt? And I didn't understand. And I'm crying. And one of the things I kept saying was, no one even loves me enough to cry for me. No one loves me enough to cry for me. And I don't know. Like I said, we didn't go to church. I didn't know who I was saying that to, but I kept saying, I'm not even loved enough to be cried for. So why am I here? And it was raining pots and pans was filling up with water all around me. I'm laying in bed and I'm crying, and I know I can't move left or right because if I did, a pot would fall and the bed was being soaking with water, and I, I I just couldn't. I didn't want to be there. I didn't want to be alive. And I don't know. Maybe I went to sleep. Maybe, but I don't remember going to sleep. I remember being wide awake. And all of a sudden, in front of me was this Jesus figure, and I didn't know he was Jesus. I didn't know who he was. There was just this guy in a white robe in front of me. At this point, there was no glorification around him. It was just him. And he just reached one hand out, and I reached my hand out to him, and he grabbed my hand, and we sat at the foot of the bed, and we looked at that little girl, and we never said a word this time, and we never said a word, and we just looked at her, this little girl in front of me, and we cried. We just cried for her, and I didn't know who he was, but I knew at that moment someone loved me enough to cry for me, and that changed everything for me. I knew whoever he was, that there was something that loved me, and I was going to be okay, but I just didn't know how. But I was so grateful that this person loved me. And then after that, I started having lots of experiences.
Wow, Samantha. The wow. I'm just almost like I can't even believe that you had an experience like that at such a young age. So you don't know who this is, but you know on some level that it's Jesus. And when you say that you're looking back at the body in the bed at the little girl crying, so do you think that you were out of your body in a
I
spirit
know.
form?
I know I was not in that body. That body was a little girl who needed love, who needed to be cried for, who needed protection, but I wasn't there. I was I was not in that body. That body was just something that needed to be protected.
But it's not like the body was laying there still. The body was crying also.
No, the body was completely still. It
Mm.
was as if as if, I was, as if she wasn't me, but I was me, if that makes sense. I mean, I still had my conscience about me. So I knew that me and the one beside me loved that little girl. We loved her. And he was going to cry for me. And I was going to cry for me. It was definitely, I was not in that body.
So when
But that
you
body needed protection.
when you have the memory that you've had this experience, did it change the outlook that you had as the 5-year-old, where before you were saying there's nobody to cry for me and you've witnessed crying for you?
It did change a lot. I knew I wasn't alone. For the first time in my 5 years of life, which felt like 20, I wasn't alone. There was somebody else there for me. And I had never felt that, even at that young age. When I look back at my memories and I think, how could a 5-year-old wish she was dead? But I did. I didn't want to be alive. I didn't want to be in this world. This world was already so painful. I'd already seen way too much, I'd experienced too much, I'd felt too much. This world was no good, and I didn't want to be a part of it. But he assured me without a sound, just by tears, he assured me that I wasn't alone. And so that's where my relationship began.
So at what point in time did you recognize that this was Jesus without that formal religious upbringing?
Oh, wow. I I would say within maybe that week, because I had a grandmother whom she was kind of my mother, protector, grandmother. She was more than just a grandmother. She was my spiritual uh, peas in a pod kind of person. We were connected from birth, I felt like. And the next day, I told her that somebody had showed up, and she told me it was Jesus, that it was Jesus, and he was always going to be there for me. Even though we didn't go to church and things of that nature, she knew him. She came from a different background, and that goes back to, we're all kind of living lives that we don't always expect to live, but she was living a life not expected. And but she knew a lot. She was my wisdom, and she expressed to me that it was God who was there, that Jesus was there with me. So,
It's
and
not
that was my
surprising to me at all because I have spoken with enough people now who have had experiences on the other side, NDEs on the other side, where they were children. And so often, Jesus is the person who shows up for the little children. And I think that that makes a lot of sense.
me too. I'm glad because he became a big part of my life. Not even though we didn't go to church, he then became a big part. But also, so many more things started happening after that first visit. It was as if he didn't just come; he came with a gift for me. And then I had started experiencing things that were unexplainable.
Well, tell me more.
Mm. Well, it was, I guess the best way to say it was nighttime was my favorite time. When I would go to bed at night, I would often get woke up by spirits. And it was as if they were going somewhere, and I was never scared of them. I wasn't, I mean, I remember literally like, hey, wake up. And I would leave that body a lot. And I would grab the hand of whomever crossed over, and we would walk, and we would go for a walk, and we would go through this pasture, this beautiful place, this filled with love and a life, and just I can't even express or explain this beautiful area I'd go to with the spirit that I was with. And then we would get to the edge of a field, and there would be this glory, this light in front of me, and it was almost as if a dome was around it, a protected dome, an area with, I don't know, you think about like the Walt Disney, Mickey, how and it had like this beautiful castle, and we would get to that area where the field would end and the light began. Is the only way I could express it. But I was never allowed to go past the field for a long time. I was never allowed to take that next step. I was always called back. But the people who called me back is where even stranger things would happen. But to me, it was I looked forward to bedtime. I couldn't wait to go to sleep because it's like I got to escape something. And that was the beginning of a very wide arrangements of spiritual journeys I would walk through. And that happened a lot. And I would be called back by my great grandparents and my who I call Grandma Dixie later. She'll join me later in that area. And then a stranger. There was always a stranger there. And my grandfather and my great grandfather and great grandmother would be sitting in one area on rocking chairs, almost like I remember them. And they'd walk, and they called me Mandy growing up instead of Samantha, Man. And they would say, okay, so Mandy, you've gone far enough, come back. And I would tell the stranger, the person, okay, just go there. And I'd point and be like, bye. And off to, to the rocking chairs I would go, and I'd pick the person whom I'd get to sit with, and they'd rock with me and talk with me and ask me. They would tell me things, and it was probably the most magical, most loving time of my life. Daytime was horrific, but nighttime is when love happened. And that field and those memories were more alive and more true than my living time during that experience in my life.
Wow. All right. I have so many questions. So The first thing I want to understand is that this sounds to me like what people describe as astral travel when they're sleeping and they leave their body. They know that they're not in their body. They know that they're in this spirit realm and they have experiences. But sometimes people also call it OBEs or out of body experiences that they're going to, and they can go to all kinds of different realms. And so there's really not a limit. How do
Right.
you look at it, and tell me how different that area is than the everyday earth experience that you're having when you're awake?
But during that time, I would definitely say it was OBE. I was just
Okay.
leaving my body, and I had no fear of it. The pasture was a place of magic. It was alive. The grass was alive. I know you hear this all the time. Everybody, almost it almost sounds repetitive when you say things everybody knows already. That's already experienced it, but everything was alive. And the strange part about it, though, was where my grandparents sat in their rocking chairs, and I would pick and sit in their lap. There was always a guy who stood behind them, and these are my great grandparents. And like I said, my grandmother basically was mom dash grandmother, and she was spiritual too. She had a gift. I I think that's why we were always connected. But when you would tell people, "Oh, what I did last night," they were like, "Oh, you're just dreaming." No, no, this isn't a dream. Like I knew I wasn't dreaming. This was living.
Well, tell how it was different than a dream so people who are listening can understand.
Well, it was different than a dream because I'm in my 50s now, and it happened as if you can think of a memory of what happened yesterday, and I was doing X, Y, and Z yesterday. It was more real than that. I was able to. I mean, in my 50s, the story will never change because it was exactly what it was. It was real. It was. I mean, I could take a lie detector's test and know that this is what it is because it just happened almost every night for a long time, and well, it felt more real than this. This sometimes feels like a dream where you can almost forget what happened yesterday. But those experiences, that time in my life, there was no going back. Like it was always exactly what it was. It was more real. And they would tell me things. We would talk. They would ask me how I was and how my day. They loved me. They gave me the love. And some people are like, "Oh, your kid's body needed that. Your mind needed." No, that may have been the first time when he appeared to me, and I needed to be cried for. Maybe I needed it then, but the rest of it was the how do I put it? The repercussion of what happens after you've met something so powerful, when you've been giving something so big that it changes everything. It just changes your entire way of seeing everyone and everything around you. And during that time, I couldn't tell you everything they told me. I can't remember every conversation, but I remember that that time of being loved by them was a gift. It was a gift from God. It was a gift saying, "I hear you. You're okay, and you're still not alone." And He still gave me those people who were safe in my life. And there wasn't very many safe people, but those who He had waiting for me on that side, was safe. And then, like I said, the guy who always stood behind my grandfather was later on a big confirmation that I wasn't just dreaming. I wasn't making it up. And when other people may have, shrugged me off as being wild imagination, my grandmother was kind, and she would say, "How'd you sleep last night?" And I think she wanted to know because it was her parents that were there. So when I would tell her the stories of sitting with Papa and Grandma Keenum, it would make her happy because it was her parents that had passed. And so I remember one time I had woke up and I had a very busy night that night, and I got up late and I was running through the living room to go get ready for school, And my grandmother said, "Oh, how'd you sleep last night?" And I was like, "Oh, I have a message for you." And she's like, "You have a message for me?" I said, "Yeah, yeah, yeah. That guy behind Papa said to say hi and he loves you." Now, that goes from, I remember one of the nights I had walked with an older man, and we had walked to through the field, and we had got to the end, and I heard them call me back. "Okay, Mandy, you've gone far enough. Come back." And I would say, "Go ahead, go." And I ran back and jumped on the rocking chair, and we was talking and, being loved on. And when it was time to leave, the guy standing behind my grandparents, said, "Can I walk her back this time?" And both of them looked at each other. And this is like human experience. This is more real than life. And he said, "Can I walk her back this time?" And they both said, "Sure, hun. Yeah, sure, you can." So I walked with this guy who I thought looked like Elvis. He was tall. He had dark hair. He had that, the 60s hair that kind of came up and over. He was nicely dark skinned. He was just very good looking, and he looked like Elvis. I never questioned who he was. I never thought anything about it. I just knew he was the guy who stood behind Papa and Grandma Keenum. And so we walked back, but I remember this night so much because he knelt down and he got to my eye level and he said, "Mandy, how's Nancy?" Which is my grandmother. And I said, "She's fine," like a kid, would say, thinking nothing about it. "She's fine. Would you give her a message for me?" And I said, "Yeah, sure. Would you just tell her I said hello and I love her?" I thought nothing about it. And I said, "Sure, I'll tell her." Boom, I'm awake. I'm in my body. I jump up. I'm late for school. Gotta go. And I'm running to the living room. And Grandma's like, "How'd you sleep last night?" "Good, good. Oh, I got a message for you." "You got a message for me?" "Yes, ma'am." And I said, "That guy that stands behind Grandma and Papa Keenum said to say hello and he loves you." Well, I think that scared her. Who's behind my mom and dad? "I don't know, Grandma. He looks like Elvis, that guy." Like, no big deal. And she's like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, be still." And she's grabbing me and she's telling me, "No, be still." "Who?" I said, "Grandma, I don't know who he is. He's always with them." And she said, "Honey, who is with my parents?" I said, "Grandma, I don't know, but he looks like Elvis and he's nice." And he said to say hello. Now, she had this fear look on her face, like something or someone is there that's not supposed to be there. She said, "Honey, go get the family album and bring it back." And I said, "Grandma, I've got to go to school. I'm going to miss the bus." She said, "I'll take you to school. Just go get it." And she's very stern at this point. You can tell I said something that scared her, and I knew the seriousness of it. So I got the family album and she said, "See if you can find that guy." Well, I'm flipping through and I'm trying to do it in a rush because I don't want to be in trouble for missing a bus. And I'm like looking, and right there in the middle was a guy in a Navy outfit with or a Navy or Army or something. He had the hat on and he was tall and looked to me just like Elvis. I said, "That's him. That's him." And she starts to cry and she says, "Honey, you can't know him. He died a year before you were born. He died in a car accident coming home from leave." I said, "Well, he's not dead, Grandma. He said to tell you hi and he loves you." And she's crying. "Do you know who that is?" "No, you can't know who that is." She says, "That's my brother." I'd never met him. I'd never seen him. I wasn't born when he died. There was no way. And that was him. He was always with them. And I said, "Well, he's not dead. He's alive. And he said to tell you hello and he loves you." And that changed a lot for how she saw my nighttime activities from that point on.
I love this so much. This is what we call evidential information, where you were given something you could not possibly have known that was confirmed by somebody outside of you. You look through a photo album until you saw at the age of what? You're like 6,
I'm
5.
5, 6.
And
Amen.
like, there's no faking that. There's no making that up. And I love that, not just for the audience and people who are watching as confirmation that our loved ones know what's going on in our lives and they love us and they've just transitioned, but that you, 5-year-old you, got that beautiful recognition that now your grandmother knew that you weren't making this stuff up. So beautiful. Okay, I want to ask you a couple more questions because you said that there was an area you couldn't go past. What do you think would have happened had you stepped past that demarcation area?
I think I wasn't allowed because I was alive. I think I wasn't allowed there because, and I would say that, but yet I've also been there since then and I'm alive. So maybe my young body wasn't allowed yet to experience that so spiritual area. The field was like an in between kind of area. I think of the world as a lot of in betweens. There's the galaxy, the dark area where you create new things, where life starts to happen, and then there's that area where you know it's safe and love, and the green pastures where we're meant to go and find peace at, but you're not fully crossed over. And I believe that that next step was for those only who had crossed over. Without a doubt, that wasn't meant. It wasn't meant for me, but it was beautiful. Lori, it was a place where I always wanted to go. I'd see it and it looked, well, later on, I got to experience it through, not through the place, but the same glow, the same glory, the same beauty of that next step I got to experience later on when another appearance that happened. But without a doubt, that was Heaven's Gate. It was definitely Heaven's Gate. That was where a place where mansions and home, and it was I knew nothing about the Bible. But now that I know a little bit more about the word, I know what I was looking at. I was looking at the pearl gate, and it shined. It was. If you think of a soft nightlight, and I expressed this in a journal that I've been writing, but if you think of the marriage of a sun and the moon marrying together, when you have that bright light, but like the moon, you can look at it so softly and just didn't
Almost
do nothing.
diffused.
It was probably, it's like that, almost missed, but it was just, man, I always wanted to take that next step. I just wasn't
Well, tell
allowed.
us about what happened when you did take that next step and what you actually saw.
I think before I could actually get there, I would have to say about, because it wasn't like I got to step over. I was just there. I remember just being there. But before that one, I've had, like I said, I've had experience with three different, well, more than three, but with you as a spiritual Christian, Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. And I had two big experiences with Jesus first. And that was the first one.
Okay.
He just showed up and he cried for me. And there was no words, there was just tears. And that was something so loving to know that there was someone who loved me and cried for me. And then the second time was within the next 2 years when, like I said, I was growing up with a lot of different types of abuse. And it wasn't just me, but there was a lot of abuse in my family, a lot of situations where you just, you didn't want to be around. And I had lived through summers of being abused by, whether it was family and some by strangers. And to explain, to express what happened was, and I have to kind of express this because it only makes sense if I did. There was a summer where I was being picked up every day by basically a guy who hung out with my parents, and I was always one of those people who, I knew things, especially from after those experiences. I felt your feelings. I thought I could hear your thoughts. I could, I knew, I knew things that I wasn't supposed to know all the time. and I could feel things I guess that a kid shouldn't feel, which made me more sensitive to certain situations. And this one particular situation, it wasn't me who was being hurt. It was someone I loved. And I had went through that one summer with that one person saying, well, you don't want to do it. I'll just get your sisters. You don't have to do it. I'll go get them. And I'm the youngest. And so you think that you're doing something to protect them. Like, I'm doing this because I don't want you to hurt somebody I love. And so later on, I walked into a situation where I seen someone I loved doing something that I knew that they didn't have to do. Like, I went through it. You don't have to do that. I did that, so you don't have to do that. And when I opened the door and saw what I saw, of course, no person thinks that they're like, you can't express to them that's not your fault. You can stop, you can walk away, you can tell him no, and so I started saying the things that I guess I wanted to say for myself when I was a child, and I was still a child. I was still 7, maybe at this point. And I screamed out, "You don't have to do that. Stop, stop." And I'm crying. You don't have to do that. And I'm thinking in my mind, of course, this person was older, but I'm thinking, he's hurting you. And he was hurting her, and whether she was convinced to do it or not, it doesn't matter. Grown ups shouldn't convince anyone to do things like that. And I was telling her, you don't have to do it. But it was too late. I saw what I saw, and they got mad at me for seeing it. And I was chased back to my room. And when I was chased back to my room and being screamed at like I was being in trouble for seeing what I saw, um, I used to have her ventilate all the time when I was younger. I had a really hard time breathing, and would have panic attacks, and obviously for reasons. And so I would have panic attacks often, and I would remember somebody wasn't there to help me slow down and breathe. Like, put a bag up. I'm talking about early 80s, late 70s, put a bag up, breathe in, breathe out the old fashioned way. Get your breath back so you didn't, faint or pass out or whatever was going to happen if you didn't breathe. And anyway, I ran back to my room. The door slams behind me. I'm being yelled at and cussed at and told if I was to tell, I was going to get beat. And, I'm being punished for seeing what I saw. And the door shuts and I'm in tears, but I'm not crying because of I'm crying because I felt that pain. I wasn't crying because she was yelling at me or they were yelling at me or because they could beat me. I'm crying because I wanted to protect her. And it was my job, to protect her. And I failed at this point. And that's what I felt like. I had failed. And so for them to scream at me and the door to shut and I'm in tears and I can't breathe. And this is where I guess you could say I kind of had a near death experience, or this maybe, I don't know what you would call it, but once again, I can't breathe. And I call this walking the rainbow because as I'm trying to get my air in from the tears, and I'm in the bunk bed and I'm trying to get my air in, and I kept trying to make myself breathe, and I couldn't. And I could start feeling my body start changing colors, and so I could feel like the yellow, the green, and the purplish color. And I got to what I would call blue, and my body felt cold, and I could, no breath was coming out, only coming in, and I was like, breathe, breathe, and I couldn't, and I felt blue at this point. And when I went blue, I heard something. I heard, it's gonna be okay. And I heard the voice, it's gonna be okay. I I immediately took a breath. I could breathe. I looked around and I'm looking for where did it come from? And so I'm looking and I heard again, it's gonna be okay. And my bunk bed disappeared this time. And in front of me was that same person who cried for me 2 years before. Was that same person they called Jesus, was standing now in front of me. But this time his hands were reached out for me. And it was different. He didn't look the same, but he did, and he did it because it was the same face, but he came with that look from when you step over to that next area where I was saying the dome was. He was the light. He had the marriage of the sun and the moon where you could, it's so bright, the entire room lit up. And it's him, his hands was reached out to me. And I remember, and I didn't tell anyone this until, for a while because I didn't understand it. But this part I didn't tell anyone for a long time because my grandmother was not with me during this time. Who was I going to tell? But the bunk bed disappeared and he was in front of me with all of his glory. And his hands was reached out to me. And I heard for the third time, it's gonna be okay. But I remember looking at him and his lips never moved, but I could hear it inside me. I could hear it all in the room. I could hear it. It was everywhere at one time, but his lips never moved. And I thought, that's strange, and I did a lot of research as I grew up trying to figure out why I could hear it, but his lips never moved. I thought that was strange until this last several years where the internet became a thing and I found out that's kind of a thing. I didn't know that. And anyway, so I reached back out to him to grab him because I wanted to go this time where he went. I knew that this is it. I get to go home. I'm going. I'm leaving. See ya. And I reached out and I grabbed him. I tried to, and my hands grabbed his hands in the light. And I remember looking at my hands as they were glowing like he was glowing. And I became almost see-through at that very moment. And as I tried to grab him, he just disappeared. And I only remember two things of that day. I remember what really, really hurt. And I remember once again what really, really saved me. And I remember all three things because I remember the one message he gave me that I've carried on for my entire life, that it's going to be okay. That whatever happens, it really is going to be okay. And that's kind of something I guess I've always held on to since that day. And I've needed those words a lot.
So powerful, Samantha. Can you explain to us, aside from the light part of it, what the face looked like?
It's for the eyes. I mean, there was clearly kind of the average Jesus kind of look, the curly hair. I remember what he was wearing. He had a white robe on with a gold slash on him. I remember his hands, but people ask me if I've seen I didn't see the holes because I remember, why did I see the holes in his hands? But it was because his hands were like they were already kind of rounded at me at first. Maybe it's because it wasn't important. The cross wasn't important to me at that point. I didn't need verification like that. I needed love, and that's what he come to do. And but it was his eyes. I think of those eyes all the time, and it was as if the world was inside of his eyes, the galaxy was inside of his eyes, but there was a reflection of a mirror, and it looked just like me. I was in the middle of the world and the galaxy that was in just two little sets of eyes. That was his. That they were like, what color was his eyes? Every color. It was every color of the universe. It was every color of the world. And then somehow or another, I fit there. It was like a mirror in his eyes of me as he was looking at me, as if I was the only person that mattered at that very moment. It was only me that mattered, and I was his reflection. And that probably was like the biggest thing I can remember most about what stood out to me. That, and how come I heard him without seeing his lips move? That was always a question in my youth, because we didn't have the internet back in those days. So.
Yeah, and you're right. That's so super common of people who go to the other side hearing telepathically, not just hearing the words, but getting packets of information and feeling the emotions of all of that. And I think this is such a profound experience. And to me, this sounds every bit like an NDE. I've done enough of these. You've had enough different markers that are indicative of NDEs, and especially because you were losing your breath. I mean, people have had these experiences when they're in a dental chair, they've been given an anesthesia that doesn't agree with their body. I mean, this happens so many different ways, but for you, like that, it definitely seems, I would call this an NDE, no question.
It was definitely different than say when I astral projected out of my body. It wasn't that same experience. It was more like the first experience without the glorification the first time, because I was like wide awake, but I wasn't. And like the first, like I was wide awake, like nothing transitioned from awake to not awake. The other times when I was out of my body and walking the path or walking the pasture, that was different. But those two times, I was there. It was as if that didn't exist, that body didn't exist, but I was there. And it was, yeah. So I guess that's what you would call, I suppose, the closest to that near death experience. Because I really couldn't breathe. I really thought as a kid, I thought I was dying, without a doubt. I felt blue. That's why I call it walking the rainbow, because I felt the colors. It was just different, and that one was, yeah, that was full glorification. Yeah.
So did you come back feeling better or worse because your little child self was like, I'm ready to go, take me, reaching out. You didn't get to go, but yet you've had this glorious experience that you know is real.
Funny, there was a message left behind me with me that I wasn't allowed to speak about, and I didn't know how to express. But he said he wasn't coming for me, and I didn't understand that then. That there was somebody else that he was going to take, but it wasn't going to be for me. But and I knew it. I didn't. He didn't say it, but you know, you know, you know, I knew all my life. It seemed like from that point, from not all my life, from that little point on, that somebody else I loved was gonna be taken, somebody very close to me, and but we had a short experience, and yeah, and I asked him to please take me instead, and he said, well, I would say he didn't say, but I knew that it wasn't for me to go, but I knew somebody else was going to.
And did that person go shortly after?
A few years, yes. My brother was murdered,
Oh,
and
wow.
he was shot, and that was another one of my after, the times when I met in spirit. He had been missing for some time, and years had gone by at this point, and there's a lot in the middle that were missing, but years had gone by, and my brother had showed up, and as I was having one of those moments out of my body, and he told me he loved me, and we had him as a missing person at that point, and but he told me he loved me, and not to do the things he had done. It's kind of funny, but there was that song, I woke up, little sister, don't do what your big sister done. Well, I woke up from that experience with that song playing, and it was like confirmation. It was him, and there was my brother, and I knew he was dead, and I ran downstairs, and I told my mother that Tommy was dead, and that didn't go well for me. You don't tell a mom that her son is dead, and so that didn't go very well for me. But I knew from an early age during those times that my brother was going to be taken, and that day is when I found out. So
And how did your brother look to you when you were with him out of your body? What did he look like physically?
safe for the first time. We were brought up in a lot of pain. The nobody should have. And I almost hate to complain, but when I've been writing this journal and just keeping up with this book, and as I'm writing through it all, I'm thinking, wow, nobody should have experienced these things. And then I also know not to feel bad for myself because I'm here and I've learned and I've got to create and be something. But my brother, I think if his time didn't come up, would he have been something he would he have got off his life path? And I know a little bit about life path because that will lead to a different story, but would he have got out of his contract differently? Would he have got off of his road? You know, would our we lose our ability to do what we come to do, and he was going to lose his. And God, that's what I love about God. He doesn't see out in time and space like we do. It's he knows from the very beginning to the very middle to the moment and to the very ending. He doesn't see like we see. So God knew, and I'm going to say Tommy knew, and so when I saw my brother, I knew for the first time because him and I used to get more beatings and more hurt than most people. I say most people, than those around us. I don't know, maybe it was my mouth because I didn't know how to say, you're a bad person or you're doing wrong. And I was very vocal about when people did bad things, and no one likes to be reminded, you know. And so they did something bad to me, I would say something very ugly and it would make them want to hurt me more. And I did that a lot. And Tommy was the same way. He was very vocal, and we got it a lot. So when he when he passed, or when he was the best version of himself. He truly was. And the only thing I didn't like was what I seen sometimes after I got that visit with him. It was as if at one point, I guess maybe I was seeing before he took, but it was his crippled. I could see because I have this thing about I could see in the dreams, and I love mystery, and that's one of the gifts I've been given. But he was always crippled in a dream of mine, even though he was never crippled. He was always crippled, but he was always being led to the water, and so he would be being, you know, with the wheelchair. Somebody was always around him, protecting him, guiding him, and yeah, he was for the first time ever not crippled. So
Hmm.
the whole time he was missing, he was crippled. But once he died, once he was murdered, he was whole for the first time and beautiful.
I love that. How comforting though. And you're helping so many people by sharing this because I think a lot of people who tune in to listen to near death experiences have had a loss that they've experienced and they want to know that their loved ones are not truly gone, that they've just made some type of a transition, and that's true that we do go on. But I want to ask you a very specific question because we talked a little bit before our interview, and you had this experience with Jesus. We've talked about God, we've talked about the heavenly realm, and you said that you're not religious and your family grew up quite the opposite of being religious. So I'm guessing when Tommy passed away, he didn't have any kind of religion in his life. And if you look at Christianity, only certain people are able to go into heaven. I would love to hear your view on that aspect of religion if you are okay with talking about it.
Religion is if we are sharing religion, that means we are sharing rules and strictness, and you have to do this, and none of that's true. I mean, on that, listen, I know that there are times where we create a hell for ourselves, and because people get lost. No one says, I'm going to be a murderer when I get there. I'm going to be a child rapist. No one signs up to be evil. And I don't believe they do. But you get lost on a path. And I know this, and I can explain how I know it, but I know that God knows already what we're going to go through, what's going to happen. And so we're not punished for the life that is in front of us. And religion says, if you don't follow this, if you don't do this, if you don't do that, God, there's none of that in heaven. There's not. When you get there, There's love, there's forgiveness, there's beauty, there's creation, you know. None of that other stuff, because God knows what happened that caused you to become what you became. What happened when you got off your life path? As I write these stories now, I think of like, wow, if I was being judged for during some of these times in my life, and religion would have said I would have went to hell. You know, you're going to hell. No, God, God knows how it started, why it started, what the purpose was, and where you're heading. So why are we making? And I'm not saying you're not supposed to live a good life, because you are. You're supposed to be the best version of yourself here that you could possibly be, because if not, you're doing yourself a disservice. But we're supposed to, no, listen, in no way would I send anyone to hell. But have I seen demonics? Have I seen evil? I've seen a lot of it. And I've literally, when I was really living in the gift of the Spirit, I could see demons very easily, as much as I could see. Well, I think I actually saw more demon than I ever did. Point. Sorry. Because in no, yeah, I definitely seen a lot of evil that happened. And I think there are some people who get so lost on their path that I don't know how God's going to fix it, how God gets them back on their path, or how God's going to recorrect it. That's not for me. I'm not the judge. But I know that no, in heaven and with God, there's understanding. He sees what happened. I mean, what happened if I was that little girl who was abused, and then I hated everybody for a long time, and I became this bad little girl, and everybody wanted to think I was bad, but no one knew the secrets I was going through. Should I have really been judged as a bad person? I don't think so. You know, God knew what had happened to me. God knows what was happening to him. I didn't turn out that way, but God knew what was happening to him. So
Yeah.
I wasn't concerned about that other part that people speak about in religion. I'm not saying it can't exist, because I think hell can save. I really think that people who speak about hell or have hell experiences is to get them back to heaven. You know, sometimes your mind, your body, your experiences have to go through something so bad because your path is so off that he's going to do whatever it takes, because he so loves you, to get you back on that path, to get you to that eternal glory. And that's where we're all going to go. That's where we're all heading for. So whatever it takes. Sometimes it takes hell to save, and sometimes heaven will save an atheist, as hell will save a Christian. And does that make sense? You
Yeah,
know what
I
I mean?
mean, I always tell people take in whatever resonates and leave behind what doesn't. Like none of us have all the answers, right?
No, none, no. And that's the funny thing about getting older, is you recognize how stupid you are.
Well, it's funny. It's kind of like the more wisdom you accumulate, the more you realize you don't know and understand, right?
And it's okay to let go.
Maybe that's the wisdom part.
That is it. It's finally when I was in my 20s, I was the smartest person I knew. I was
I love
so
it.
smart. And now I'm just like, yeah, no. So
So funny.
I think that whatever it takes to get you to get to that next level of glorification, God's going to do, because he so loves the world. He wishes no one to perish. You know, he doesn't want any of us. He created our spirits. Why would he want to destroy it? So, you know, he's always getting us there. And whatever's going to happen next, he's getting us prepared for it. That's what I think. So, yeah, I was never religious. I'm a churchgoer. I love my people. I do. I love my seniors. I love my kids. And yet I'm still not one who's going to be anybody over the head. I am no one's judgment. If I was to be judged, listen, if I was the judgment, I'm going, if there's a hell, I deserve it. Okay. Like I know where I came from. I know the things I've done. I know the mistakes I've made. And so if that hell is because of what we do in the middle, like if I would have died in the middle of, say, I've told this to my daughters. If I had become a drug addict for a while. Obviously, I got really lost for a while, and if I would have died in my addiction, I wasn't going to hell. I still wasn't going to hell. That's because God knew my intentions. He knew what caused it. He knew what brought us there. He knows our pain, and He's going to do everything it takes to get us back to where we need to go. Some of us just take a little bit more patience. I clearly took some patience. He had to be a lot of patience with me, but, and I don't feel bad when I look back because I go, look at that little girl. She deserved to be protected. She deserved to be cried for. She deserved to be angry. There was times in her life and if she got lost for a little bit, it was all part of the big plan. I was heading somewhere. I didn't know where, but I was still going somewhere. And here I sit today. And since that, with Christ, since that glorification I had with Christ, I said I had experienced two experiences then with Christ when I was a little girl. Much later in life, I had an experience with the Holy Spirit, which was completely different than when I experienced Christ alone. And then I had an experience with God the Father, in those realms that we were talking about that I thought we would never allow to be. But I spent a lot of life spiritual, I think. I didn't know how I was getting there or what happened. And sometimes it misleads you because when you have that experience that's so heavenly, you're so want it back. You become so open. And sometimes we open the wrong doors, and I got really new agey, and things kind of happen in between life that I'm writing about and kind of getting out there. But the direction is for me to be here today, where I'm at today. Everything leads you to where you're supposed to be.
So before we go on, I want to ask you one more question. So you're little and you're 5 and you have that first experience with Jesus and you go out of the body, and then every night you're having these experiences until you have that NDE when you're about 7. So on an average, just kind of a guessing number, how many times do you think you experienced your out of body realm at nighttime? I mean, we're talking probably hundreds if there's 365 days in a year, and you said it's happening most nights. How many times do you think you were able to get out of your body by the time you had that NDE, and did that still continue after that?
From the age of 5 to 7, I would say it wasn't a nightly occurrence, but it was probably 3 to 4 days a week for at least 2 years.
Well, that's like 200 times.
That's a lot. I was constantly, maybe it's because daytime was so horrific, but I did it a lot when I was
So
a
like
kid.
maybe 400 times in 2 years.
Yeah, until one day somebody came and talked about religion, scared me so bad that I didn't want to go back there. Yeah, a religious person, I would say, I guess she was strict Pentecostal or somebody very. I remember I met this girl. We were in Colorado, and I met this girl who was never allowed to have friends over and stuff like that because her mom was very strict. And anyway, I was privileged enough to be her guest, to come to her house. And I remember she had like one doll. The only alarm clock was the wind up kind because there was no electronics in her home, no TVs, nothing like that. She was very strict and rigid. And so being there for her was like an exciting thing. And I went to her bathroom to use the bathroom. I came out from using the bathroom. Her mom was there, and she stood over me, and like a wall. She was just boom there, and she grabbed me, and she just started praying in tongues, I guess, and language I didn't understand. And my friend was standing there crying, "Oh, let her go," and she's doing this thing with me, and then she lets go, and when she lets go, something, like, I don't know, it just like left out of my body, and and I'm little, and it threw my body all the way to the ground, but my hair never moved. And then all of a sudden something wrapped around my body, and her hands are not touching me, And my friend is, and it's like it's 3D. And all of a sudden my body stands itself back up and something wrapped around me. And she looked at me and she said, that place you go at nighttime, you can't go back. And I thought, how does she know where I go? How does she know? The only person who really knows is my grandmother, and that's in Texas. How does this woman know where I go? And she said, the devil is laying traps for you. You can't go back. Evil is waiting on you. Do not go back. Well, that really scared me. But honestly, and that also opened up, weirdly enough, more evil than it did good, because I became scared of now of the only thing that gave me comfort. I went from the only place I had comfort in was that nighttime experience, the time with my grandparents, the love and the peace that I would get, to now I have nowhere to go. And the only thing I had to battle was the demons every single day in real life, and no place to run to. So that changed a lot, but it didn't stop it later on, but it did open different doors of fear, And so I said, I'd never do that to anybody. I would never, that's part of the religion, that I would never set traps for anybody. It's not fair. So without explanation, and only fear was left behind. So now I got fear to live and fear to die. So I didn't know where to go from there.
But luckily later on, you have this experience with the Holy Ghost. So why don't you explain that one?
Well, in between all those years, I did recognize that I was an empath of a person. I understood people. You used to be call me sensitive or whatever, but that's what people would call me. Oh, you're just sensitive. Well, I just felt everything and could see things, and I would dream about people, and some people called me a witch, and some people called me all kinds of stuff because I would know things. I still wasn't. I was on and off I wasn't in church still. I was on and off that. The one time I tried to go to church and become something I thought good, the pastor was bad, not a good pastor. Demons were everywhere in my life. Everywhere I looked, there was always somebody bad that I had to battle in order to be safe. And I may look like this now, but I was quite the hot young lady, and I was a high fashion model, and I did some really cool stuff, but I hated me. I hated me because I was just being used everywhere I looked, and I didn't know how to protect me. So there for a while, there was no God. There was no, now there's no spiritual anything since that situation. And where was a girl to go? But I knew things. I felt things. I dreamed things. I came back with a lot of gifts. I could tell you something, and people would I'd be like, I know what you did yesterday. Because your spirit's telling on you. I could see spirits in people. They would tell on them. I could feel the presence of it, but there was just no holy stuff. It was more visual, a vibe, a vibration. I could see. I've seen even demons, pop in and out of people's bodies, and they would tell me the things that they do, and people would want to kill me. I mean, I've been in serious danger because they'd be like, "I know you did this. How do you know?" Oh, and they'd want to. I mean, I've been held captive because I knew things I wasn't supposed to know, and I didn't know how to shut up. I didn't know how to say, I know you didn't do the right thing. And they didn't want to be busted. And anyway, so that caused a lot of that situation in that hallway that day. It's like lost me a protection that I leaned on out of fear. And then other doors opened up, and I could see and feel and hear things. There was a time, of course, in the middle of my life, I got really lost, and I started making decisions that any lost person would make. And first, I need a little bit tell you before I get there. And I'm sorry, I know this is going long, but my youngest daughter, she's 18 now. She came out with a gift, and like I said, I would know things before they would happen, so I could tell people. Like I told my doctor, I was in my mid 30s when I had this one, and I was like, and I was high risk because I'd already had 22 missed losses at that point. I just couldn't carry children. I had 2 children, from one of them when I was 14, one of them when I was 19, and one when I was in my mid 30s, and lots of losses in between. So I was high risk, and because of a lot of the damage that had been done to my body from the events of a childhood, and and I, I I thought, well, here comes another birth. It's just going to be another dead baby. What's the point of even trying? I didn't even go to the doctor. I wasn't going to, no one was going to, it was just another bad situation about to happen. And when I got the 3 months, I realized I better get to the doctor because this one may stick. I didn't lose her. And so I'm like, I better get. So I started trying to see the doctors, and I was so high risk, nobody would take me. And I remember seeing this one old doctor. I'm telling you, he was like 4 foot tall, and he was, 900 years old, except, just exaggerating, but he was old and small and had little shaky hands. And then when I went to see him, he's like, and I refused to leave until he was going to have to tell me, no, you're not going to be my patient to my face. So that morning I had the sonogram, and he said he'd call me, and I said, well, I'll be here when you're ready. And he's like, no, just go home. I'll call you. I'm like, okay, I'll be out there when you're ready, So I went and sat in the waiting room, and about 2:30 that afternoon, I'd been there since 9 a.m. He opens the door to walk a patient out, and here I sit. He's like, Samantha, what are you doing? Waiting on you to tell me no to my face. And it's like, hold on. And he went back, and he looked at my stuff, and he came back, and he said, I'll be your doctor. So go home. And I'm like, good, because you're going to save my life. And he said, quit being dramatic. But things like that happen to me all the time. I knew things that nobody's supposed to know. And I knew if someone was going to die. I just always knew stuff. And I knew he was going to save my life. And if he didn't take me, then I wasn't going to live. She may live, but I wasn't. And so he accepted me as a patient, and I had my daughter, and I almost died, and he had left, walked away, drove away, and came back and saved my life. Okay. And he came back, and I said, see, I told you. And he was like, I think he retired after me. It was done. Yeah. He was like, yeah, that was weird, because that was my life. That was the way things happened with me. But you should also know that all my daughters are born on the same day and at the same time. So
Wait a minute. Hold on. All of your
yeah,
daughters are born on the same day and the same time?
three daughters at 3:30 on the 21st, at 3:31 on the 21st. Now here's where it gets weird. I was overdue on my last one, and they wanted to set a whatever it is to get your labor going. And my sister was with me. She's like, no, she'll come on the 21st, like the other ones did. And I said, not this one. I'm already 10 months along at this point. And I'm like, not this one. She'll come on the 12th, 21 backwards. So she came on the 12th at 3:33. So with all for a good purpose. So yeah, they were 3:30 on the 21st, 3:31 on the 21st, and 3:33 on the 12th. 21 backwards. Yeah. So this one's different, special. But the other two are wonderful and great too. Just don't get me wrong. All of my births are very different, and there was a message, and there's so much to tell. But anyway, she was going to be different, and I knew it. And then I had experiences with God Himself, with the Father Himself, and I had experiences with angels during that time. And that's been over the last 15 years.
I thank you for sharing it with me. You've not shared it before, so I super, super appreciate it. Like, these things are never wasted, right? Yeah. And you have had so many experiences, more than the average person, and you're going to help so many people with what you've shared. So why don't you share in any way that you want to the experience that you had with God?
So the God experience was, again, it was an astral projection type situation where I was not in my body. And I had the pleasure of sitting on God's lap. I sat on God's lap, and God the Father, not the Holy Spirit. Like I said, I had that big God experience with the Holy Spirit and Jesus, and but this time I'm on the Father's lap, the Creator, and I'm sitting on His lap, and He's reading me a book like a child. And this was just not that long ago. But he's not reading the book like the Bible. Like in the Bible, it's Genesis, the Revelation. This time he's reading it as in one, two numbers. He's using numbers. And so as he's going through and he's reading it by the number, by the date, by the time, it was as if he was telling me what was happening and what had happened and what's about to happen. And then it just I want to glorify it so much more than I can, but it's hard to express the true essence of what happened. But I'm sitting on his lap and he's reading me the book and he's reading it by numbers. And God the Father I can't see him. Above him is galaxy, is like the aurora lights, it's the rainbow, it's colors, it's the universe. But yet I'm on his lap like a little girl, and I fit perfectly like a kid on your lap. And he's reading the book, and as he reads the book to me, I started with the feeling of a child being read a book, and I ended with tears because as he reads the book, he gets to the end and he says to me, he says, well, it's time to prepare. And I said, but Daddy, we're not ready. And he says, it's time to get ready. And I said, but Daddy, we're not ready. And I'm crying. We're not ready. It's not time. We're not ready. And he says, honey, it's time to get ready. And he closed the book. And when he closed the book, it was like thunder and lightning. It just like a clap, like a I like thunder had hit the earth. He closed it. I heard it, and his hand, which is probably the most amazing part I remember about God, is his hand was as big as the world, and he came to pat me on the back because I was crying, and to tell me to get ready because he was coming, and he went to pat me on the back, and I watched his hand be as big as the world and fit softly, snugly on the center of my back and just patted me like I was a baby. And he just said, it's time to get ready. And I don't know what we're getting exactly what I do have some things and that I don't want religion to take over my mind. And like, this is what I want, whatever it is, it's time to get ready. And he told me that we have to start preparing. So he read me the book and he treated me like a baby. That's because I'm his baby. We're his baby. We're his children. And we're just little bitty people compared to God I literally would look up. I kept trying to see his face. I wanted to see his face. And his face it was just bigger than the universe. I couldn't see it. But the lights, and it was just the most beautiful light show. But the hand I remember the most because his hand was bigger than the entire world. And it fit right to the cuff of my back. And he just patted me and told me it's time to get ready. And he loved me. And it fit right to the cuff of my back. And he just patted me and told me it's time to get ready. And he loved me.
Wow.
And that was pretty much my last experience living.
Wow, Samantha, you have had a lot of experiences, and I know way more than we were able to cover here. So I know that there are people who are going to want to connect with you, and you've started something pretty special online, which is how my sister found you, is that you're doing an online journal. So why don't you tell everybody what you're creating and how they can find what you're talking about?
You can find me at Samantha Sides on Facebook.
Let's spell it. Let's spell it.
ID as in David, ES. Take my side with an S. Samantha Sides. I'm in Texas. So Samantha Sides in Texas. This beautiful face here you'll find. And what I have is an online journal. I decided to start. So everybody kept telling me I need to write a book. Listen, I'm old and I'm not old, but older, and I don't know how to do But I started thinking that online world is a forever thing. You can go back you can go back to MySpace and find out what kind of trouble a person was in, and it's always there. And I thought, well, how can I reconnect? What happens if I go? What happens if I don't get to connect to my grandchildren or my great grandchildren, which I'm very close to, my grandchildren? And but what if I'm not here for them? This is forever. The online thing is forever. So I'm now opening all the stories in every detail, in truth, in all pain and all ugliness and all accountability. I've opened it up and started writing a journal about not just my spiritual experience, but almost a year by year of what created, because God knows our intentions and how we became who we became. So I want them to know who I know and how I know and who I was, and who I am, whoever she is, whoever that Samantha is. And so I've opened an online journal for to have a forever footprint. And in a way also because I think it helps even my daughters either be able to go back and review, forgive, understand, because perspective is a big deal in life. And so
Absolutely.
my
It
perspective,
paints the picture for everything.
and that's where I'm at.
Well, I have one last question for you, which is, what do you think at this point in time that you know for sure?
I think I'm going to say exactly what I was just about to say about perspective. There's a lot of truth. People always say there's only truth, it's black and white. No, it's not. Truth is not black and white. There's so much gray. There can be 2 truths, 5 truths, 10 truths at one time. And it's okay if your truth doesn't match up to their truth, because you have a complete different experience, a complete different set of eyeballs, a complete everything. And you're supposed to not judge. How can I say what happened to you was a true, or how you saw it was a true, or any less than what happened to me? Or it's unfair. So perspective in life is probably the most important thing at this age I can see. It is okay that you don't see what I see at the same time. And that's exactly what makes us good. That's what makes the world better, because that perspective, and that's what makes forgiveness also happen, is recognizing that it's not always your truth. It's your truth, my truth, their truth. And it doesn't mean they're liars. It just means that we're at a different place at a different time. And I know that for a fact. And it's okay that you're different, and it's okay that they're different. And we're supposed to love them and be the best person we're supposed to be. And if they're not where you are, as you think, or maybe they're better in a different position than you are, then learn from, receive, and grow, and take with you everyone you can. Because perspective is great. It's very great. Truth is a lot of them. A lot of them.
That is so wise. I'm really glad you shared that. I've never had an answer like that to that question. That was very, very beautiful. Thank you so much. Samantha, I want to thank you. Thank you so much for being vulnerable enough to come and share this story with the world. You will help so many people, and I want to thank you for what you are doing to help wake up the collective. It is so needed right now.
Thank you for finding me. Thank you for letting me, and thank you for letting me be here to share with you. I think you're beautiful, and what you're doing is changing the world. Thank you for that.
Thank you. And of course, this show is absolutely nothing without all of you who tune in to watch, to listen, and to share these beautiful experiences with somebody who needs it. If you got this far with us today, just let us know. Put collective in the comments or waking up the collective, so I know that you got this far. But if you still have questions, you can join me for Wake Up Wednesdays at 5 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Mountain, 7 p.m. Central, and 8 p.m. Eastern. Thank you, everybody, for watching. There's a reason you found this video. These stories awaken something ancient inside us. Hit subscribe and stay on the path with us.